Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tabletop Talk. I'm your host, Chris, and for this topic, we're going to talk about why I personally prefer tougher encounters. Now, if you've seen my Pathfinder 2nd Edition DM solo combat test video, you will have seen the encounter that I used, or the encounter that I built for that video. Uh, which, if you haven't seen it, you should go see it. But if you haven't, basically, there were 4 level 1 party members, and across the river, there were 4 orcs. There was one sort of powerful, heavy hitting orc, and then 3 sort of lesser powerful orcs. Um, and one of the bits of feedback that I got from a viewer who commented on that video was that they thought it was strange how after the players won the encounter, but after they won the encounter, they were completely wiped out, and they would have had to have rest to have gotten all their spells and stuff back. And I replied that if I was actually DMing a game and included this encounter, then I would be sure that that was the only encounter that they did for the day. Like after they did that encounter, I would make sure they didn't face another one until they rested. Um, but that got me thinking, why is that? Why? And I've under my belt, I've got a few years of solid D&D. I haven't had a game in a few years now, but in the past, I've DM'd several games. Uh, the longest game I DM'd went for like half a year, which isn't too terribly long in the grand scheme of things, but you know how things are. Anyway, that's for another video. But even since then, for the very first game I DM'd, I always favored tougher encounters, and so I asked myself why. And I've come up with a couple of reasons that I want to present to you as to why I prefer tougher encounters. Um, I think that all encounters should be difficult. They should they are simulating combat. They are simulating a life or death struggle that the players are having with an enemy. And so it should and so the game should sort of represent that. Um, which tougher encounters do a better job at representing that because the players have more to worry about. They have more of a real chance of getting hurt, getting injured, getting killed than a sort of less difficult encounter where the players are just sort of expected to stomp the enemies and just get a modicum of XP and then continue on their way. Um, I think all encounters should be difficult. An addendum. I also think all encounters should be memorable. Now, and in relation to that, an encounter's toughness is a good way to make it memorable. Now, I'm not, and I just want to put this out here, just put this out front. I'm not saying that difficulty is the only way to make an encounter memorable. There are lots of different ways you can make encounters memorable, which I can make a video talking about that in the future. But there are lots of ways to make an encounter memorable. Difficulty is one way to do that. And um, I point, as a sort of example of this, I point to Dark Souls or any other game, any other From Software game. I was blanking on the name of who made Dark Souls for some reason. Any other From Software game is essentially the same kind of thing. There are these. The whole game is built around these boss battles with these big enemies. They're difficult, but they're fair. And the way to beat them is to continuously play them over and over again until you figure out the patterns and the attacks and the methods that you need to beat them. Now, obviously, you can't do that in D&D because when your players die, then they're dead. But that's the sort of um, spirit can be acquired and put into your game. So not necessarily that you expect the players to die so they learn how to fight the enemy, but rather you sort of expect certain things out of the players. If you include tougher encounters, you expect them to use good tactics, you expect them to have a good use of their abilities and spells, and you expect them to have a bit of luck, a little bit of luck. After all, it is a dice-based game. Um, so a difficult encounter would would require that the players used all of those things to their utmost abilities. And an easier encounter, they wouldn't be bothered because they would just squash the enemies and there would be no point. Also, and that relates to stakes. Well, that doesn't relate to stakes, but stakes is my next point. Easy encounters have no stakes. There's no there's no stakes. There's no sort of sense of desperation if you know and the players know that this encounter is just there for them to kill something so they can get XP. Um, and that's also why I hate random encounters because if you're just traveling along down the road and then you just roll a dice and then it's like, oh, I rolled a random encounter. Let's see what we got. Oh, some wolves attack. That's really lame, and it doesn't add anything to the story or the overall sort of it doesn't add anything to the story of the game. Um, so my sort of question would be, why would you want to include an encounter just so the players can win? Um, if you include an encounter just so the players win, then the answer would be just so you want them to have XP. You want to give them XP. It's very meta, but at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. But if you have an encounter that's so easy that the players just steamroll through it, and in Pathfinder Second Edition, uh, which just came out, they sort of list some rules for building encounters, and so they have rules in place where if you wanted to have a sort of moderate level of difficulty or an easy or very easy or whatever, so it's easy to do this stuff. If you make like an easy or a very easy encounter, essentially you want them to get XP, but they're not going to get very much XP. So you'd have to give them lots of little encounters in order for them to level up at any reasonable pace. Um, and so my question was, why do that? In my opinion, one big, epic, climactic encounter that the players will remember is better than several smaller encounters that they'll forget the instant they win. If you walk away, if you DM a game and you include tough encounters that the players need to have good tactics for, they need to know their spells and abilities and use them well, and a bit of luck. If you make your encounters like that, they'll go away from your game and they'll remember those encounters because they'll remember how difficult they were. They'll remember how hard they were, and they'll remember how good they felt when they won. And if they died, they'll remember the story of their death because deaths in D&D often make very good stories, which is another video I could talk about. Um, so yeah, basically, when you're playing D&D, in my opinion, the whole purpose to have the whole, how do I want to say this? When you're playing D&D, in my opinion, the whole point is to have a memorable experience. And one of the best, well, not one of the easiest ways to have a memorable experience is to have harder encounters. And It's not the only way to have a memorable experience, but it's one of the ways which you can build your game. So that's just my thoughts on the matter. Why I personally prefer tougher encounters over easier encounters, and maybe you will agree, maybe you won't agree. I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there.